you.
Hi, my name is Felice Kelly, and I'm a Portlander first, and I'm also a volunteer member of the 350 PDX Forest team. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and thank you for all that you guys do. I know that the Urban Forestry Commission is doing a lot to help protect and expand the tree canopy in Portland, and I think it's really important work, so I really appreciate all the time that you guys put in. As we sweat our way through another record-breaking heat wave, the importance of trees, especially to the most vulnerable people in Portland, is obvious. Our city's trees are one of the most valuable tools for building climate resilience. And already low-income communities suffer more in hot weather because they don't have enough trees. The climate crisis is here now, so we need to protect our green infrastructure, not sacrifice it into manufactured in a manufactured conflict between affordable housing and shade. So I was dismayed to hear that members of Governor Kotek's Housing Production Advisory Council are considering a proposal that would gut Portland's tree code by executive decree and leave only weak protections for trees over 60 inches in diameter breast height. This is crazy. A 60-inch DBH tree is a huge tree. So this would, in practice, roll back most of the tree protections in development situations in the city. And it would have the effect of decreasing the urban canopy right when we need it the most. The tree code here in Portland was developed through community input and voted on by City Council. And this process produced a set of regulations that are designed to help create a climate resilient Portland. 350 and myself as a volunteer there were involved in the advocacy for a strong tree code. We reached out to City Council members, we provided testimony. We wanted to see a city that is prepared for the climate crisis, as prepared as we can be. But unfortunately, as a regular citizen, I don't think Governor Kotek is going to listen to me a lot when I reach out to her and tell her that this is a really bad idea to supersede local tree codes. So I think she would listen to this body. So I'm here today because I hope that the Urban Forestry Commission would consider reaching out to Governor Kotek and telling her how important the tree code is for shade equity here in Portland and for producing the climate resilient and shady city that we are going to need in the future. Thank you.
Any quick comments from commissioners on that?
I would agree wholeheartedly, especially with the fact that it's completely outrageously hot and then that news comes out. I don't know if that had any timing specificness to it, but yeah, that really threw me, especially with 60 inches. So I'm in support of this.
I will just add, I have an update during Casey's report on that as well. So yeah.
We are aware of that.
For sure.
Also alarmed. And so thank you for your support. Don't underestimate your impact as a citizen and part of 350 PDX. So continue to speak out.
Do you think you guys would consider reaching out to the governor directly?
We
Or
are
the
definitely
office?
working on a plan
Okay, awesome.
for this.
Okay.
So
Okay, cool.
the exact nature of which
Okay, thank
to
you.
be determined.
And
Yeah.
I'm sorry I won't be able to stay for the whole meeting. I have to run up to work. So I'll probably leave
Fine.
just a little bit.
All right. Thank
Thank
you.
you. We did have one other person sign up for public comment, but I don't see them in the participants list. So on.
Okay, great. So we're going to move on to the meeting minutes. It's just June that we're looking at
Just June,
today.
yes.
Ryan, okay. Any motion to approve June minutes or any requests for changes?
And I'll just note that Bruce sent some great changes. Roberta did as well. So there was a new version that I sent out this morning about a half hour ago that
okay.
they incorporated those. So
Okay,
there is
Commissioner
a slightly
Meisner.
new version there.
Thank you. Just one quick change. I noticed in the minutes for the future agenda items, it says that I requested information on the aquatic center. I had requested a discussion on it due to the amount of trees that would be lost, potentially be lost because of the aquatic center. So I just would like that change, please.
Okay, thanks.
Let's see, is that Angie DeSalvo? Do you have your hand up or? Is that a wayward hand? Okay.
Oh,
It's
that's
probably a
the-
mouse.
That's the cursor,
There we go. Okay, is there a motion to approve the minutes with the requested revisions?
I'll move, and I'm assuming Brian accepted the suggestions.
Yes, yeah, incorporate those.
Excellent. Any second?
A second.
All in favor? Any noes? Any abstentions? Okay, very good. Thank you. Moving on. So we have a forestry report from Casey, and thank you so much filling in for Jen, right?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Casey Jokerst. I work directly underneath Jen as the Urban Forestry Permitting and Regulation Manager. So responsible for all of our tree inspectors as well as the implementation of Title 11. So for the report today, there's been some recent interest in the media in response to PBOT tree watering. There was an article about trees that were planted by PBOT in the Mill Park neighborhood, but that they were not properly established. These trees were part of a capital project that was led by the Bureau of Transportation, and they were planted by landscapers that were contracted by PBOT. So when Urban Forestry plants trees, whether it's for capital projects like this one, or whether it's for our own parks, we do 3 to 5 years of tree planting establishments. And so this is different when a bureau is contracting out another sort of external entity in order to establish those trees. So just wanted to make that clarification for everybody. But on a positive note, it has caused PBOT to engage with Urban Forestry to think about perhaps engaging us in more of their establishment and tree planting that they do for their projects. We have some open positions here in forestry. Currently, we're recruiting for multiple tree planting specialist positions to support the growing tree planting program. We are also working on hiring some code specialists to support the newly formed code compliance program. So those code specialists are essentially, to some degree, administrative type staff to help support the tree inspectors that will also be on that team. And that team is run by Rick Faber. And we can put a link in the chat for those open positions. There's also a coordinator for the permitting and regulation team. That position has just recently closed, although there's a potential that it may be reopened. It was initially advertised internally just because the work is very complex, but we're waiting to see how many applicants there were. And if there were too few, then we might open it up to be external as well. Moving along, so the city's natural resource delivery programmatic assessment. So that's a mouthful. And this is about sort of the restructure of our government and natural resources within the city. And so I believe Angie DeSalvo, who's here today, has been our representative in those meetings. So again, this is a project that's part of that transition to our new form of government planned for 2025. And will likely include some significant changes to the structure of how we all are structured right now. So city staff and consultants leading this project presented an update to the Parks Board on August 8th on the potential for the integration of natural resource services. And I believe that you all were encouraged to attend the meeting, but there is also a recording of it. So if you were not able to attend it, I do encourage you to watch that recording so you can see the presentation of the work that's been done thus far. And then additionally, just this past Tuesday, so just a couple days ago, there was a meeting for the permitting task force. And I'm not sure how much that has been brought here, but there's a permitting task force that was put together. It's probably been about 2 years now to sort of look at private development permitting and how that functions within the city and how to improve efficiency and essentially get permits out the door faster and more effectively. And this last meeting that happened on Tuesday, the mayor attended as well as multiple commissioners. Commissioner Rubio was there, Commissioner Maps was there, And unfortunately, Commissioner Ryan was sick, so he wasn't able to be there. And the result of that meeting was the mayor indicating that he and the commissioners, in sort of working together, were going to bring a resolution to council on August 30th to essentially unify development permitting procedures into one group. So we don't know what that all means yet, but it's a relationship to that new structure that the city is going to be having. So it's sort of tied into that. So I just wanted to share that here, although I don't have a whole lot of answers or details related to it. And so the resolution is supposed to come to council on August 30th, and then the intent that the mayor said was that it should be established and implemented by July 1st, 2024. So a little bit less than a year from now. And then lastly, I wanted to hand it off to Brian, who's going to talk a little bit more about the HPAC that we have a guest here for today. He spent a lot of time being involved in it, so I'm going to let him give you the update on that.
Yeah, so I have a somewhat long report on this. You've likely seen the Lima Week article that talked a little bit about this. So the Housing Production Advisory Council, it's formed by the governor's office, and they're tasked with developing a set of recommendations to bring some legislative options to increase residential development in Portland. In Oregon. So these will be statewide. On August 8th, staff from Urban Forestry, the Bureau of Development Services, and Planning and Sustainability attended a work session of the HPAC that was discussing tree codes statewide. Portland and Salem presented information on their respective tree codes, and then there were staff from a few other cities as well. I know staff from Eugene were there, I think Florence, Oregon. So some of the larger metro areas were represented. Urban Forestry shared information on Portland's tree code, which noted that it provides clear and objective standards to tree preservation, removal, and mitigation in development. Very importantly, we noted that Title 11 currently exempts all lots zoned for more than 85% lot coverage. So basically your higher density, multifamily, mixed use zones. Those are exempted from tree preservation requirements under Title 11 right now. And based on the city's comp plan, that's where 80% of the housing production is planned for. So we wanted to note that for most of the areas of the city where housing development is expected and zoned for, tree preservation requirements do not apply. We also provide information on a study done in 2020, which showed that the large tree stopgap amendment, which you all are familiar with, given your involvement in the past, which requires higher mitigation for larger trees, 20 inches or larger, would have minimal impact on housing development. In fact, that economic analysis found that 54 housing units over 20 years would be built as a result, which is, I believe, 0.005% of the planned residential development over that time period. So we thought we'd provide really clear information to that group. That group moved forward with a proposal that would prohibit cities from requiring tree preservation or mitigation for residential developments under 10,000 square feet for trees 60 inches or lower. I think they actually lowered it to 48 inches or lower. Just for context, 0.07% of our street trees are 60 inches or greater, and a similar percentage, under 1% of our park trees are that size. And of course, 10,000 square foot lots are rare. Most of the lots are around 5,000 square feet, and the larger ones, due to the 85% lot coverage, are already exempt. So effectively, it's a proposal that would preempt all of local tree codes. Parks and BPS are submitting a comment to that group. It's being signed by both bureau directors this morning, and it'll be submitted later this afternoon. And some of the things that we highlight are, one, we are in both a housing and the climate emergency, and so we should be responding with balanced approaches that consider both. We encouraged HPAC to focus on more effective strategies, as Portland's tree code has not been shown to be a deterrent to housing production. The city and developers, through some of the surveys and outreach done the last few years, have cited far more significant obstacles. And the city is in the process to loosening many of those. Bureau of Land Sustainability is working on a set of regulatory changes to bring to City Council in the next few months that do not pertain to trees or natural resources, but focuses on other land use regulations, which have been shown to be more costly to comply with. And then lastly, Oregon in the last legislative session required all cities to develop a housing production strategy, which Portland is currently doing. Bureau of Land Sustainability is working on that. And that allows for a much more well-coordinated and calibrated plan, which is responsive to local needs, rather than just a statewide preemption. So that's the gist of the comment. I can provide that to the UFC after it's signed and submitted this afternoon. And lastly, I'll just note that this is just a draft proposal. The HPAC will be putting together a full report in the next few months that covers all of the recommendations they're making. And then, of course, these are just recommendations. It will still need to go through a legislative process. So there will be more opportunities to comment and respond on this. Yeah, that's it. That's what I wanted to provide you all an update on.
Any questions or thoughts on any of this?
I have a question. Brian, what were the other things, or do you know what the other things are that are being cited as issues?
I'm not no, we haven't been tracking the full HPAC. We were just involved in that work group, so specific to tree code. I know there was another Land Week article about wetlands development. So I expect this to be a fairly far-reaching set of recommendations, though. The composition of the HPAC is mostly private development. It's my read on it, and not honestly, I've only been involved in just the tree code issue specifically, but it seems to be a group put together to provide private development's perspective on this. So it was never really intended to be, from what I can tell, a balanced approach that tries to, it's sort of, what do you want to see?
Okay.
So how that report is used by the governor's office or legislature, I'm not entirely sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
And the last thing I'll note is, in terms of the UFC can draft a statement and provide comment on this. Since the UFC is advisory to the city, and this would be going to a separate government entity, that comment would need to be approved by the Office of Government Relations. So just a process note. So the content could change as it goes through that process, but just noting that for now.
So I would suggest that we, and I don't know how, develop some sort of statement on behalf of USC to submit to the intergovernmental relations entity within the city, to add our voice to concern about this. I think COTEC needs to hear from as many entities and people as possible, because political pressure is going to be the only thing that will change this decision, even though it's months away from final. So I don't know if we want to do that through the policy committee, or if somebody wanted to draft something that we bring to the next Urban Forestry Commission meeting. But I think there is time for us to take action in the prescribed manner. And so we just need to decide how we're going to do it.
Thoughts on that? Commissioner Vandermark, I'm sorry, I didn't see if Commissioner Meisner was first. I'll call on Megan first. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I agree with Bruce on this. I feel like there's just been a lot of community concern around this. And I think whenever there's an opportunity to comment on issues, particularly how trees and housing are often portrayed in contrast, right? There's this really strong narrative that our communities have to pick one or the other, and that is always deeply concerning to me that that's our framing. So, and I know there's just been a lot of community concern. So I would propose, I'm open to the various ways that Bruce shared that, or, you know, whether it's policy committee or someone taking the lead, but I do think we should utilize this opportunity to, you know, put forward our perspective on this.
Commissioner Meisner?
So Brian, just to make sure I'm understanding what you said correctly. So essentially what you're saying is that the proposed rules wouldn't actually affect housing development in Portland because most developments already exempt. So essentially the proposed rules is just weakening the tree code.
Yeah, that's basically our read on it. The tree code mostly, because most of the growth in Portland, it's meant to be dense growth within centers and corridors in the central city. So really where the tree code in terms of tree preservation applies is usually those single family duplex, triplex developments in neighborhoods, which is where only about 20% of the future housing production is really expected to occur. So that's something we wanted to emphasize is it's a fairly small number of development projects that actually have to comply with the tree preservation standards.
And
Okay,
yet-
well, thank you.
Mhm.
let me just actually respond to what you just said, and then Commissioner Jordan next. So therefore, if there are changes that are absolutely required in the tree code because of this, it would tie the hands and create change over a vast area that would be affected. I'm trying to kind of get that second part
Yeah,
of the net effect
right. Yeah.
in UFC's view.
Yeah, and it's important, but most of the canopy is on that private land, and because those developments are low density developments, we think the sort of ratio of housing to tree loss is skewed, as opposed to in the higher to density zones where you might get larger apartment buildings or condo buildings or multi-unit developments. Mostly what development you're seeing in the residential areas is single family. And that's so for the amount of tree loss compared to the amount of housing units gained, it's not a really good, it's not a good trade-off.
Right. Commissioner Jordan.
Yeah, thank you. Can you guys hear me? Okay. On Commissioner Meisner's question, it's a good question. I think I would clarify that the tree code applies to many development projects, but it doesn't apply. I think what Brian Lando is saying is that it doesn't apply to as many units. It doesn't apply to many housing units because there's a lot of lots that trigger it, which I think is its intent, but we're not seeing a prospective impact on the numbers of units that are needed to help address the housing situation. And I think the other point is that some of those apartment buildings that you're referring to, I mean, there is community interest in trying to figure out a way to create more dense development and have trees in the future. So I think when Title 11 is updated, we'll be looking for creative ways to do that without and meet multiple goals. We have pitting housing and trees against one another, as others have said.
Great. Okay, so the upshot, how do we want to proceed in communication about this? Should we go through our subcommittee? That seems to make the most sense for me, unless someone's independently wanting to volunteer to do the first draft. What do you think, Bruce?
Okay, we can figure it out on the policy committee and bring a draft. It's only a draft. It's not a decision. It's just a draft that we'd bring back to UFC at the next meeting.
Awesome.
And if anybody is interested in they have specific things they want on that draft, email me or come to the meeting. The meeting's Monday, 5:30 to 7:15. If that, I'm fine with that.
Great. Excellent. All right. Thank you very much for that report. And we'll just move on. We're right on time. So our next agenda item is the PBOT's 82nd Avenue Crossings Project.
Yes, and Nicole Pierce, the project manager from Peapod, is here to present that. And I'll give a quick framing that just to note the scope of this presentation. So there is a lot of planning work being done on 82nd Avenue. Peapod is planning really significant changes to that corridor, and there is ongoing outreach happening on that. I know that Ivory and Bruce both attended an open house a month or so ago on that project, but this is specific to some of the critical fixes that Peapod is doing in more of the short term. And it's looking at a few different intersections where some changes are being made and where there's some opportunity for getting trees into that project. So we are working with Peapod to have a briefing on the longer term work on 82nd Avenue, but this is more specific to those six intersections.
All right. Thanks, Brian, and thank you for having me. My name is Nicole Pierce. I'm a capital project manager at PBOT, and I lead the large capital project delivery section. Thank you for inviting me to your meeting. I'm really interested. I've never been to this meeting before, and I'm interested to hear your ideas and your priorities. And Brandon Nam, the urban forestry tree inspector for this project, actually for all of the 82nd Avenue projects, he has graciously agreed to join me today to talk to you about some of the specifics of the technical things like tree species selection. So Brandon is a great partner, and he and I have worked on lots of projects together. So thank you, Brandon, for agreeing to help me out today on such short notice. I really appreciate that. I do understand that you're, as Brian alluded to, you're mostly interested in hearing about the upcoming crossing project. I did want to just start with a quick overview of kind of all things 82nd Avenue. So I am going to share my screen, see if I can get this to work. Here we go, share. Can you guys see that?
Yes, looks good.
All right. So I'm going to kind of run through some of these introductory slides pretty quickly, but please, feel free to interrupt me. Maybe Brian, if you could, monitor if people have their hands raised. I welcome having a conversation rather than me just talking at you if that's what works for you guys. So either way, I'll just jump into it and go from there. All right. So as you all probably know, 82nd Avenue was formerly owned and operated by ODOT, and it was transferred to PBOT jurisdiction a little over a year ago. So PBOT's mandate is to make critical safety and maintenance repairs in the near term. And as Brian mentioned, we're also doing planning for future improvements on the corridor. So 82nd Avenue is the geographic center and heart of Portland, and really has suffered decades of neglect. It was what ODOT referred to as an orphan highway since they finished construction of I-205. So lots of deferred maintenance, not much attention to poor old 82nd Avenue under ODOT's tenure. So PBOT's hoping to do lots of maintenance and make things better out there. Lots of folks live or work near 82nd Avenue. It's one of the most diverse areas of the city. And it's dangerous. You probably don't need me to tell you that either. It's on one of PBOT's designated high crash corridors. There have been lots of pedestrian fatalities, and most of the folks pedestrian fatalities were folks just trying to cross the street, which is why there's really an urgent need to build some of these pedestrian crossings. 82nd Avenue is also an important transit corridor. Fun fact that the line 72 has the highest ridership in the state and higher even than some of the TriMet lines. And so Brian also mentioned that we've been doing some community outreach, lots of it. And we're hearing from folks, you'll be interested and probably pleased to hear that trees and landscaping is kind of rises to the top as #1 priority for folks out there, followed closely by the safety thing. So lighting and, safety in general, which kind of encompasses safe crossings. So just as a side note, this crossings project that Brian mentioned that I'll get into more detail about also includes lighting for the entire corridor. So there is some lighting out there, and we did a lighting analysis, and we're filling in the gaps to make sure the whole corridor is lit to our standards. So what's happening now? For this pedestrian crossings project, we just recently, like a week ago, executed the construction contract for that project, which will include the 6 signalized pedestrian crossings. Those are at Northeast Beach, Klickitat and Schuyler, and Southeast Clinton, Schiller, and Ash. And then also the lighting that we talked about. Let's see. So these crossings are being delivered on an accelerated schedule, for 2 reasons. As I mentioned, that urgent safety need, but also as part of the jurisdictional transfer, we received some American Rescue Plan Act funding, and that funding has some pretty strict deadlines. So that money needs to be obligated by the end of 2024 and spent by the end of 2026. So it's $80 million. So we're trying to kind of scramble to get all of that money, all the projects designed. It's 2026 maybe seems like far away to you guys, but in terms of transportation project development timelines, that's pretty quick for such a big project. So we had to be pretty quick getting this out the door. So the crossings will be signalized. They're going to have various types of signals. I think 2 of them will have those rectangular rapid flashing beacons. 3 of them will have half signals, and then 1 of them will actually be a full signal. There will be a median for the pedestrians to have refuge in the middle of the street when they're crossing. And those medians will have trees. This rendering, I couldn't find a better one that showed more trees. Most of them, and the following slides will have more details about the specific locations. But yeah, this one just shows 2 trees. Most of them have, 6 or so trees. So we did our best to, get in as many trees as we could. What else? So we're also doing all the ADA curb ramps at all of these locations and some stormwater upgrades. There are constraints, of course, working in the right of way. The biggest one is safety. So, the trees have to be spaced and located such that the cars can see the pedestrians and everybody can see each other. So safety is kind of #1. The Water Bureau, so there's lots of utilities under the street. The Water Bureau has pretty strict requirements. Can't have any trees within 5 feet of 24-inch or smaller pipe. And then for pipes that are larger than 24 inches, it's a 10-foot setback for those trees. Fortunately, on 82nd Avenue, the water lines haven't posed much of a conflict for the places where we want to plant trees. The other kind of utility that's out there, of course, is the Bureau of Environmental Services sewer pipes. And they have historically had a similar policy as the Water Bureau, 5 feet away, et cetera. We have been working with BS to try to come up with a limited exception to that requirement. And so where we are now with BS is on a case-by-case basis, they will allow exceptions for trees over sewer pipes that are deeper than 10 feet, that are in good condition, and that they would be able to access for maintenance without, if they need to in the future, without cutting down the tree. So that means, being able to come in from the side, I believe that is what that means. So those are kind of some ongoing conversations, and I suspect that Forestry is having similar conversations, and that's kind of happening with people above my pay grade, but those conversations are definitely happening. So we may see more leniency from them in the future, but we've at least gotten some allowances, which is nice. And then the other factor is, we'll be planting these trees in the median. So unlike when we plant trees in the planting strip, where the landowner is then responsible for maintenance, for the trees in the median, the PBOT maintenance forces will be the ones responsible for maintaining those trees. And of course, like every city bureau, we have limited resources. And so any plans to plant trees in the median have to be vetted through our maintenance folks. And they are generally supportive of tree planting, and they are intending to maintain the trees. But it's definitely a piece of the loop that we always have to consider. So we do have another larger project coming up, and we're between 30% and 60% design on that project. So we're not quite ready to talk about specific trees and locations on that project, but we will, if you'd like, come back another time to talk about that. So let's see. So before I turn it over to Brandon to kind of go through the tree species selection, I did want you to know that Urban Forestry has been involved in the design conversations for all of the 82nd Avenue projects from the start. But the conversations about the trees and the medians have been evolving, and they continue to evolve, and they've certainly evolved since the time that we were pens down on these crossing project plans. So that was, a few months ago, and now we're to where we have a construction contract. So there are certain improvements to our current plans that Brandon and I have been talking about, and that Urban Forestry would like to see incorporated into this upcoming project. So we are, Brandon is working with his folks to come up with some recommendations, and then we are going to, we'll have to evaluate the technical feasibility of those things in terms of engineering and utility conflicts and things like that. But assuming that it's engineering feasible, we will then take that proposal to our contractor and get a price. So how much will it cost to do this, say, extra excavation and use this special soil mix? Or I'm just using examples. I don't know exactly what it's going to be, but, and then assuming the project can afford it, we will add those extra requirements to the project by change order. So I'm fairly optimistic that we will be able to incorporate a lot of the recommendations that I will get from Brandon, but that come from Forestry in general. So what else? So I guess at this point, I will hand it over to Brandon.
Okay, hi everybody. To remind you, I am a tree inspector working on the capital improvement projects for the city of Portland's urban forestry. And we've been working with Nicole and Peabody on these 82nd Avenue projects and focusing a lot on the median. So I'm going to focus mainly here on the median trees. And so in addition to reviewing the plans and making sure that they meet Title 11 requirements in terms of preservation and tree planting, there are some specific things we've been looking to recommend and potentially maybe require from PVOT. And a lot of that, like Nicole said, is still being reviewed by urban forestry management. But much of it will focus on tree planting species. So we have the ability to require certain tree species, and that's what I'm mainly going to talk about here is the tree species we've selected for the medians. We're also looking at tree spacing. So I think that there's some limited soil volume available below ground in these medians. So I'm potentially requesting that large stature trees be planted farther than 25 feet on center in the medians. We've also recommended ground cover installation and treatments within the median, so potentially excavating the entire soil volume within the median and replacing the soil with a recommended soil mix. In addition to potentially requesting also silvicells or structural soils to improve that soil volume access for the trees. You can go to the, oh, and here's like a great photo, I think, of some of the medians in New York City. So they have a great design guideline for planting median trees and medians there, and it's pretty comprehensive. So I recommend you have a look when you have a chance. Okay, next slide, Nicole. So growing trees in the median at 82nd Avenue, it's a tough place for a tree to grow. You know, it's a tough life out there in the middle of 82nd Avenue. So some of the things we're considering when we're selecting tree species is the lack of growing space below ground. Compared to planting a tree in the sidewalk, the road bed beneath the concrete or the asphalt is often greater than a foot deep, up to 3 feet deep, and it's severely compacted and impermeable. So we don't often find roots below the road. And so we need to make sure that the soil growing conditions within the median are optimized. And then looking at how much heat is reflected off of the black asphalt, pollution from passing vehicles, and due to the limited access to soil volume, potential drought stress in the trees. And one important thing we've focused on is as our climate in Portland becomes hotter and drier in the summer, it's important we consider which trees are going to tolerate these major changes in climate. And so I've selected trees that we think will be able to tolerate these changing hotter and drier conditions, but are also able to tolerate, you know, the cold and minor frost that we experience here in Portland as well. Okay, next slide, Nicole. So here's the list of trees we provided for PVOT to plant in the medians. Almost all these trees come from Portland's existing approved street tree planting list, but I selected trees within that list based on their ability to tolerate increasingly hot summers. You will also note that I've tried to incorporate a lot of evergreen oaks and conifers that provide canopy benefits year round, in addition to having leaves on them in just the warmer parts of the year. And that allows them to provide a lot more benefits, including intercepting rainwater. So one thing I thought about when making this species list is that our climate is becoming a lot more like Sacramento, California. So I selected trees that are commonly planted in California. So you'll find ginkgos, zelkovas, and hollyoaks in there. And I've also looked at trees that are native to California, such as the live oak, interior live oak, and the valley oak are on there as well. So I've thought a lot about what Portland is going to look like in the next 20 to 50 years and tried to select trees that will just really thrive in those changing conditions. And so you'll also notice on this list, there's a lot of trees that are not commonly planted in Portland now. So I think it's a great opportunity to plant a lot of trees and to plant a lot of trees that we think will do well moving forward. And another thing I would like you to notice on this spreadsheet is that there's a lot of species diversity along the corridor. And right now the corridor mainly consists of flowering pears and red maple. So there's not a lot of species diversity there. There's not a lot of canopy resilience. And so by having a lot of different trees for us to choose from, it allows this historically underserved part of the city to improve their canopy resilience. And these are very large. I tried to pick the large stature trees that I think will be able to grow in there. So we'll have a much improved canopy cover as well as resilience to any pest or disease that might occur in the future. So now I'm going to go over the different the specific intersections as part of the 82nd Avenue median crossing. Thanks, Nicole. So this will probably go pretty quick. So here we have trees at North and Beach and 82nd Avenue. So we're planting 2 European hornbeam. I know, Nicole, you wanted to mention something here.
Yeah, so Brandon is saying 2 trees, but as you can see, there's only the one. This was a conversation with BS. We did have another tree in that tree well on the right side. I don't know if you can see my little hand, but BS asked us to remove that based on the fact that there was a sewer line beneath it. And then since that time, you know, we've had further conversations with BS and they've kind of come to this limited exception idea for sewer lines that are deeper than 10 feet and in good condition and able to access. And it's my understanding that this location meets those requirements. So PBOT is in the process of submitting a design exception to BES to try to add that tree back to the project. So to be determined there, but I'm hopeful that we'll be able to plant 2 trees in this median. So go ahead, Brandon.
Okay, we can go to the next slide. So the next intersection is Klickitat. And here we have 6 scarlet oaks. And to be fully transparent, this part of the project was reviewed by a different inspector. And it was prior to us assembling the tree planting list that I had shown you on that previous slide. So I may reassess the tree species planted at this location and request different tree species from the approved list be planted at this location. And the next one is Schuler, and this is 4 sawtooth oak trees. So those are some great large stature oaks that I think will do well here, and you can tell they're well spaced apart from each other, giving them plenty of room above and below ground to expand their canopies and roots. Okay, next one. So here are 5 Platanus hispanica London plane trees. So these are great trees that will tolerate some tough growing conditions. They're notoriously able to tolerate a lot of pollution, which of course is going to be an issue planted between the 4 lanes on 82nd Avenue. So I think this is also a good choice for the medians. Okay, next one. And then here we have some swamp white oak. So a somewhat uncommon tree in Portland, but common elsewhere. And I think will also provide a good amount of canopy coverage at this location. And then the last one is ash. And here we have Carpinus betulus, European hornbeam. This is a pretty common tree already in Portland, but we know that it's able to tolerate some hot conditions, and it's commonly planted further south as well. So I think that this will be also a good choice for planting within the medians and on 82nd Avenue. And I think that's all of the intersections. So are there any questions for me or Nicole?
Brandon, why are you planting monoculture of trees in each particular crossing? Why don't you use diversity there? Because if indeed we have an exotic pest come in and they take out all of a particular selection that happens to be at a particular crossing, then there's nothing there. I know the diversity is often thought of in a much broader framework, but design-wise, if it's about diversity and it's trying to prevent denuding of areas, why go with still a monoculture? Is it strictly because you think it's a cost savings?
I think honestly it was aesthetics. So a lot of times people like to see a row of the same tree, but I will work with PBOT to address that issue.
Okay, thank you. Also, would it be possible to send to Brian the list of the species so I can actually read it? My eyes aren't that good, unfortunately.
Yeah, I provide to Brian. I'll make sure that he does have it. And we're also working with, we're still like under review with some of the underground recommendations in terms of silvicells and soil as well. So that will hopefully also come across your desk as well.
Also, sun scald is a significant problem for trees along 82nd Avenue. Granted, it's mostly maples and pears, but are there going to be any measures taken to reduce the possibility of sun scald on the west side of these trees? Because it's going to be a lot of reflected heat coming off. And when the trees are first put in, they're typically limbed up to about 5 or 6 feet. And so that's going to be a very exposed surface.
Yeah, I think ensuring that those trees are adequately irrigated will be an important part of preventing sun scald on them. And then continuing to monitor them. So instead of just having urban forestry look at those trees at the end of the establishment period, having urban forestry inspect those trees periodically to identify any issues. So I think those are important steps that we will take to, identify sun scald or any other issues that the trees might encounter.
The last question or comment I have is, I wouldn't ask urban forestry to build a road. Why does PBOT think they can take care of the trees once they're in?
I mean, I don't, if urban forestry wants to take care of them, we're more than happy to let them do that. I mean, part of the issue is that because the trees are in the middle of a busy road, that, most maintenance of those trees is also going to require traffic control. So,
I can add to that a little
Yeah,
bit, Nicole.
yeah.
So what Nicole's talking about is that they would be responsible for watering, which most people can manage that, but PBOT has an interagency agreement with urban forestry in order to provide maintenance work. So if there needs to be pruning or that type of work, that is still done by forestry, and PBOT pays forestry to do it.
Yeah.
Good. Commissioner Bechtold?
Yes, hello, everyone. I just wanted to confirm whether we had considered the location of power lines near where the trees will be planted, because I do think, the height of the trees and some of the trees, I'm not an expert in trees, but I am mindful of wildfire risk or tree failures and how they can impact power lines. Just wanting to confirm we've thought about the height of trees and location of power lines as part of the consideration process for what trees to plant.
Yeah, that's definitely one of our major considerations when we're looking at selecting tree species. So there's not really any overhead high voltage lines above the median at these locations. And so large stature trees are appropriate here, but we always look to plant the right trees in the right places, and the city's approved tree planting list sorts trees based on whether it's overhead high voltage lines or not. So definitely something that is important for us to consider.
Thank you, Brandon.
Commissioner Jartner?
Yeah, thank you. I was gratified to hear that the community is calling for more trees and landscaping, and this is important to them. And along the lines of trying to support the community and support the staff here, can you give us a sense of how the Urban Forestry Commission could be helpful at this point, either from Nicole, Brian, or Brandon? At times the commission has written correspondence to the bureaus in support of what they're doing, or to their directors, or to the commissioners. If there's a way to, seems to me, the interbureau collaboration around this, both early on in design processes and trying to work with the utility bureaus to, again, meet multiple objectives would be helpful. Can we support you in any way at this time or in the future?
Thank you, Roberta. That's a very generous offer. I think we will need to get back to you on that. I do like the idea of getting some kind of letter of support from y'all, but I'll have to put my head together with maybe Brian and some other folks and see what form that would take.
Sure.
Commissioner Clapp.
Thank you. Thanks very much for the presentation to both of you, Nicole and Brandon. So first, I want to thank Brandon for putting together a good list of trees. But one thing I wanted to note is to see if there'd be a possibility of getting more evergreen species in the medians, as your initial lists, and you noted during that was a big point to get conifers and evergreen species on. Yet it looks like the plantings don't actually have any of those. So it'd be great if we could see if there's an opportunity, maybe along with Bruce's idea of diversity, adding in a mixture of conifers or evergreen into that mix. The second thing I wanted to note, or rather ask to Nicole, is if there is extra right-of-way on the frontage zone side of the curb and sidewalk. Essentially, how much more room do we have to work with as a city in the right-of-way for 82nd Avenue, or is there any?
So for this project, we chose these locations with an eye towards getting them constructed quickly. And that decision was made to choose places where we didn't need a lot of right-of-way to get the crossing constructed. That being said, there are, I don't know if you noticed on a couple of those, we are doing some planting in the planting strip at some of these crossing locations. And then in terms of future projects, certainly, we're looking for any opportunity that we can find to plant trees, and we have a bunch of different ideas in the works. But at the end of the day, we have a certain pot of money and a huge backlog of unmet maintenance needs, including, just basics like paving and replacing old signal equipment. So that kind of longer term planning effort is kind of trying to figure out with the money we have, we need to pave the whole thing. And then, yes, I mean, in an ideal world, we would widen the sidewalks to, the 12-foot or the 15-foot wide corridor with the planting strip with trees everywhere. But, so funding is a one constraint. And then also just, in terms of acquiring right of way, some of the lots on 82nd are pretty small. And so if we were to acquire an additional, say, 4 to 6 feet of right of way on some of those properties, that would be a pretty significant impact to the property. So we need to kind of balance the business needs with right of way acquisition and sidewalk widening. So, it's definitely in the mix and high priority, in part based on what we're hearing from the community. So to be determined.
Okay, thank you. Well, that is one thing that I think I'd like to ensure, and I know you're obviously presenting to the Urban Forestry Commission, so I know that you're putting everything very tree forward right now. Having worked with the city or having worked at the city in development, I know that you can often make a plan that has a lot of trees in the rendering, and then by the time something's actually done, for whatever reason, this piece of infrastructure, that piece of infrastructure, this budget, all of the things end up becoming a higher priority than the trees. So I want to make sure that you guys keep that mandate that the community has given you to put trees as a higher priority for that chunk of money that you have, as a higher priority than maybe keeping the status quo of infrastructure as it is. Because I think that that is really important, and no one wants to see that you have spent, $80 million and planted 25 trees along a street where everyone said, please make this happen. And thinking in the long term, you have to plant the trees immediately for them to have any significant impact going forward. So thanks very much. And I just want to make sure that I can put that out there as something that I think should be really paid attention to as it's the project's moving forward.
And Casey, for your comment on the evergreen trees, I do have evergreen trees on here. I have incense cedar, I have 3 kinds of pine, and some evergreen oaks. Maybe I can give the spreadsheet I have to Brian, and you can feel free to have a look and add species and send it back to me. I'd be happy to add more if you have some in mind.
No, sorry, not on the list. I meant on the actual planting plan, where it was carpinus and deciduous oaks. Yeah.
Okay, I understand. Cool.
Yeah. No, the list is great. I really like the list.
So guys, we're almost out of time. Well, we are out of time, but this is important. Maybe take another couple minutes and wrap it up. So Commissioner Lilly.
Thank you. I'll make it short. Just to quick question: how many trees are being currently planned to be planted right now?
Well, 17,
9,
21,
18.
26 trees.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Oh, that's the
And-
median trees at least.
Yeah, and so that's not including some of the trees that are in the planting strip. So 26 median trees, and then 1, 2, 3, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 trees in the planting strip and 26 trees in the median.
Cool, great. So I think that's an important number for at least for an accountability standard to like that. East Portland, Division Street, flashback here of a lot of trees in the beginning part of the plan, but as was mentioned before, it kind of, when push comes to shove, when things start happening, that number always gets lower and lower. And I think we get that just to note it,
Yeah.
and to that there's you mentioned it's community priority, so I think part of our role also is like holding as city employees and city folks accountable to that. So just thank you for that.
Yeah, and I will, in defense of the Division project, there is a giant water line that runs right down the middle of Division. So it was unfortunate for tree planting.
Thank you.
We don't have that on any second. So.
Just about out of time. I just want to make one quick comment. I think it's been well said by the other commissioners, but thank you for this hard work and interagency work that needs to be done to get these projects done. Thank you for assessing the community needs and identifying trees and landscaping as number one. In your presentation, it still feels like the street trees are somewhat of an afterthought. And so, that are being dealt with one by one post a construction contract. And so just wondering, you know, and again, we would love you to come back and talk to us in more detail about the street tree plan and the overall concept with 82nd and how you can proactively have agreements with the other bureaus to sort of not deal with each tree one by one as an afterthought. I know it's a large topic and thank you for your efforts.
Yeah, and I will say this project has had a very quick timeline for delivery. So, you know, we have been having these tree conversations, you know, all along, but it does kind of feel like an afterthought moving forward, you know, with the next big project that's going to go into construction in like 2025. Trees are a much more integral part of the conversation, and, you know, hopefully it will feel different.
That's fantastic. Okay, let's go ahead. Thank you so much for your presentations and your support of this work. Let's go ahead and move on to the next agenda item, which is the PSEF Equitable Tree Canopy Initiative update.
Hi, everybody. I guess this is my time to jump in.
Okay, welcome, Mr. Granfield.
Hi, yeah, I'm David Granfield. I work at the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability on the Portland Clean Energy Fund team. James Valdez is also here with us today on the team with me. We've been working together on developing this equitable tree canopy program. Really excited to kind of give you all a preview and hear some of your thoughts and questions. I've got some slides prepared. Shouldn't take, you know, much more than 10 or 15 minutes. So hopefully we can have a great amount of time for some questions. Is it cool if I just start sharing my screen here?
Please.
All right. Okay, let's see. Making some adjustments here so I can see you all. I'm going to try to keep my eye out for questions, hands, and comments. Can you see this kind of green slide up here?
Yes.
All right. Again, David Granfield. I've been with the PSEF team since the end of 2020. I am the Regenerative Agriculture and Green Infrastructure Project Manager. Kind of the first person brought on to the PSEF team to focus on ag and green infrastructure in our investments. Okay, so without talking too much about the Portland Clean Energy Fund as a whole, I do kind of want to just kind of give y'all a quick timeline of just where we've been over the past few years. So if you don't mind just following me on a little journey here on this map. Back in November 2018, the Portland Clean Energy Initiative, you know, it was a ballot measure that passed, and it kind of developed this incredible fund that we're using for, you know, community-powered climate solutions. Our, you know, PSEF adopted a city code the next spring in February of 2019, and we put out our first request for proposals right after, and starting awarding grants in April of 2021. You'll see here just kind of along our timeline, you know, if you were tracking anything with PSEF, one of the biggest things that we learned is that the fund was bringing in money a lot faster than we thought it would. Initially, it was thought that the fund would be bringing in about $40 million a year. And it's looking like it's, depending on how you count, it could be 3 times or more that amount of money, which is a good problem. But it kind of helped us to kind of think a little bit more strategically about how we wanted to start spending money. One of the things that we tried to respond to early on was just the heat that happened in 2021. And so that right away kind of helped us to develop a heat response program to kind of help get cooling into some of Portland's most vulnerable communities' homes. and in developing that strategic program, it kind of started helping us think about, how can we be a little bit more strategic with our investments? And one of the first things that we thought about was a really strategic tree planting program. So some of the seeds of this program go, back a few years. In our first 2 rounds of grants, we saw a lot of proposals coming in from community for ideas around tree planting. People are looking around in East Portland, and one of the top things that people are asking for is shade and trees. Unfortunately, enough of the proposals that came in, technically they were not eligible, just based on the fact that there's so much intersection between public right of way and tree code and urban forestry's responsibilities, and then ultimately, like, who owns the land that people want to see trees on. All of that kind of experience and thought and feedback that we were getting from community led us to kind of developing this tree canopy program. Last fall in October, we changed our code for the Portland Clean Energy Fund. And one of the significant changes was that, instead of having one route for funding, which is just nonprofits coming to the city with a proposal, we're now able to develop strategic programs and create more interagency agreements with the bureaus here at the city, to try to kind of work together to direct some of these investments in a way that'll have a larger impact for people in the city. Since October of last year till now, we've just been working tirelessly with Brian and Angie and other folks at Urban Forestry to kind of really quickly pull together this plan. And I think it's time to start talking about it. So just real quick before we talk about that plan, I just want to share, kind of a piece of overview. So far, we've invested about $12 million across our regenerative agriculture and green infrastructure grants that are all community led by nonprofit organizations. Really cool projects there. If you ever want to learn about some of those, there's some articles online, or I'm happy to connect with anybody one-on-one. So we've got about $12 million out in projects that are running right now. And we're already, planning our next 5 years of investments that include an additional $80 million of investments, roughly. And kind of like I mentioned before, some of what we learned in our first 2 requests for proposals is that there's just a strong community interest in trees and shade, especially in East Portland. And then the other kind of big takeaway for me is that, community powered tree planting projects at a large scale require really significant support and involvement from the city and urban forestry. So the program, we're calling it Equitable Tree Canopy, with the idea that we're gonna direct most of this investment into Portland's most heat vulnerable neighborhoods to equitably plant at least 15,000 trees across combination of public and private property. The locations of where we're going to plant trees, the exact neighborhoods and some of our target areas are still yet to be determined. But I think, we've all seen a lot of the same heat maps. We all understand some of Portland's most heat vulnerable neighborhoods. And so we're kind of starting our focus there. Some of the things that are going to make this program stand out is we're going to have a 5-year post-planting establishment period for trees that are for trees that it makes sense to do that establishment. We're going to track the health and wellness of samples of these trees to just figure out, how well this investment is going. The idea is to build really great relationships with some of the geographic and community-based organizations throughout East Portland. And really just kind of want to ramp up our communications and, services that we're able to offer to recipients of these trees, and make more connections between some of the different tree planting programs of the city. One thing that we know right off the top, and I'm sure y'all are very familiar with, is just the capacity of the community, for-profit contractors, and local government, the capacity to plant this amount of trees. You know, we're going to have to raise capacity across kind of all of the sectors to be able to reach our goals here in this project. So capacity building and workforce development, those are going to be some of our top focuses. And we recognize that this won't happen without an express focus there. And there's even going to be a budget allocation set aside to focus on the capacity building for contractors and folks on this project. One thing that we heard a lot as we were developing this program and accepting public comment is that a lot of people are worried about the city planting new trees, but not having funding available to help with trees that are already established that need you know, some deferred maintenance. So we're going to be establishing a separate fund alongside this program to be able to support people with trees that need some deferred maintenance, pruning, structural pruning, and maybe even some tree removals in some cases. Wanted to share with y'all a little bit about the public engagement that we've done so far. We held a series of 5 roundtable meetings where we brought together members from different tree planting organizations and community organizations. I think even Commissioner Jortner was a part of the roundtable, so thank you for your participation there. Where we gathered folks for a few hours each meeting, a couple hours each meeting, and just talked through what this program could look like, who should be involved, what scale are we talking about, and really try to highlight some of the challenges that we'd expect with this type of investment. We also had 2 open public comment periods when we put drafts forward for what this plan might look like. I think we got some comments from some current and former Urban Forestry Commission members that were super helpful. The great news is that, you know, in the comments, people are surfacing a lot of the stuff that I heard y'all are already talking about today, such as species selection, plant procurement, and, you know, some of the things that impact trees in some of these heat vulnerable neighborhoods. I've tracked going back maybe 18 plus months of development on this program's design in tandem with Urban Forestry and several community organizations. We've been attending some of the Shade Equity Coalition gatherings that have been happening in the community. Megan from Friends of Trees led us on a tree walk out in East Portland. That was really informative and great to help the PSEP team all understand some of the challenges with establishing trees. Here's just a list, if you can see, of some of the contributors who have been involved so far in this project. This is not an exhaustive list. I mean, if I put everybody on there, it would you know, run off the slide here. But our just to highlight that our focus is to really be working with community-based organizations every step of the way. So one of the things that we're going to be establishing alongside this program is a work group that's going to be advising the implementation of this program. Not going to necessarily be a decision-making body, but they will be kind of standing alongside the program, understanding all the challenges and the progress of the program. This work group is going to be evaluating data and recommending the geographies for planting and some of the priorities there. This work group will advise on allocations between street tree and yard tree plantings, how to prioritize that in different neighborhoods, especially when it comes to the private versus public planting. The folks on this work group will participate in reviewing the requests for proposals that come in from contractors, or if there's any grants associated with this program. And the work group's going to also help with some of the outreach practices just around like how we get the word out around getting trees out into the neighborhoods. And over the time of the program, we're going to be, monitoring and collecting data, and this work group will kind of have like continuous feedback to be able to kind of help direct this program as it gets going. In some ways, maybe the work group is going to support this program in similar ways that Urban Forestry Commission supports urban forestry. This slide here shows the composition that we're hoping to have for this work group. The work group is going to be managed by the Portland Clean Energy Fund, and Urban Forestry will be bringing staff and content forward to the work group to be able to understand what we're thinking about contracting and maps, geographies, and any other data that's going to be important. This is still pretty flexible, but what we're thinking for now is that there's going to be 9 to 12 folks on this work group, representative from the Bureau of Environmental Services, hoping to have somebody from the Urban Forestry Commission here, no pressure. We're going to have someone from the PSEF committee on the work group. We'd love to have a researcher or someone from an academic space, either from like an urban forestry background or kind of like social determinants of health, some sort of way to really connect this to community and geography. And we'd love to have a really nice mix of community stakeholders. Some of the geographic-based neighborhood groups might be interested in some of these seats. Or even potentially some of the nonprofits who are working in tree planting and establishment. And then one of the cool things about this work group is that we're hoping to have some of the implementation partners or contractors who are actually working on the project. We're hoping to have them on the work group as well to be able to just bring that direct connection to the work, how things are going in the field. I think the idea is to just keep everything on the table so we can just be addressing challenges as we go and learn from each other. We will circle back around to Urban Forestry Commission to just chat about how we'll do the recruitment and how to select someone to participate. This slide here might take a second to digest, but it is how we've kind of divided up primary program roles to implement this program. Starting from the left, heading over, the Portland Clean Energy Fund is going to have total program oversight and monitoring the budget and managing public reporting, accountability, storytelling, and keeping things aligned with what the Portland Clean Energy Fund is and managing the work group. We've talked a little bit about the work group. They're going to kind of be advising the program. The Urban Forestry is going to be delivering on the program. This, I'm sure we could spend a whole nother meeting talking about, but they'll be staffed up in a way to be able to focus on contract management, tree procurement, site planning, planting planning, and monitoring trees over time. And then there's going to be plenty of opportunity for-profit and nonprofit organizations to be involved in planting, establishment care, and some of the outreach and workforce development pieces. Does anybody have any questions? I feel like I'm kind of powering through this. I've got one more slide and then maybe we can just jump in. This just is going to show the timeline of where we're at now, 2023, and this program is fitting inside of our kind of 5-year climate investment plan that runs from 23 to 2028. So the idea is that we're going to be ramping up this program over the next 2 years and getting the planting and establishment started, and then likely it will continue on past 2028, but we'll have the money allocated during this 5 years. And the hope is that this program is successful. We're able to build capacity across the entire world of urban forest work, and hopefully be able to continue these investments and continue this work beyond this initial 5-year investment. I believe this is all I have. I'm happy to go back to any slides if anybody wants to ask any specific questions about stuff that they saw here.
Why don't we go ahead and minimize the presentation just so we could see the other commissioners?
Yes,
Okay.
of course.
Okay, we have a bunch of questions here. Commissioner Meisner?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the presentation. My first question is I saw that that money's being put aside for maintenance for income-based for people that might not be able to afford maintenance on trees. Is any money being put set aside for like sidewalk repairs for tree roots? Because I know that's a major pushback from people when it comes to planting trees, is people are concerned about sidewalk repair costs.
Thanks for that question. At this time where it gets tricky, with some of those right-of-way pieces, we don't have any budget at this time for sidewalk repairs or unimproved roadways. That's something that we know about, and we're going to continue to highlight as it comes up through this project. But the truth is, if we get into that work, the cost per tree for this program is going to kind of start skyrocketing. But we're hoping that, some of the precedent that's set through this program can help highlight some of those barriers to getting trees in and maintaining existing trees. Definitely something we've got our eye on, but not something that is kind of an eligible expense with what we're investing in at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Clapp?
Thank you. Actually, just to speak to that, one thing that is important to know about urban forestry's tree planting list. So any street tree that is approved has been reviewed to get rid of the trees that cause most of the damage with sidewalks. Your red maples and sweet gums are the big culprits, also cherry trees. None of those are allowed anymore. So a lot of times, if you are planting a tree properly that is approved for the site that is being planted, it's likely going to be a tree that has minimized impact in terms of root damage to infrastructure. So the one thing that I was curious about is how the funds are going to be used. So I saw that Urban Forestry is going to be delivering the project. Does that mean that Urban Forestry would be the entity that does the maintenance and all the planting and things like that? Or is that going to be, you saying the capacity would be other people? So I guess, how do we actually get trees planted and maintained with this money? And if I have a tree and I'm low income, how do I approach you guys and say, I need help with my tree, what do I do?
Yeah, great question. I think, we've got $40 million for this program. And right now we're working with Urban Forestry to develop our interagency agreement and really focusing on how the money's going to flow on this project. The idea is that Urban Forestry staff will be staffed up in a way to be able to manage contracts with folks who can do planting and establishment work. And so some combination of Urban Forestry staff helping with, procurement, plant selection, and site planning, and then hiring contractors to deliver on the planting and establishment. We're still kind of figuring out what the options might work there. The different pathways that contractors can jump in on, but that's the idea.
Thank you. Nelson, are you next? Did you have your hand up?
Yeah, it looked like there was going to be no planting for at least a year and a half. And that's just because it takes bureaucracy that long to figure out how they're going to do what they're going to do. Is that correct? And how much money is that involving?
Yeah, I think the part of the reason why planting isn't going to start until 2025 is just because a few things. We're staffing up here at Portland Clean Energy Fund to help manage this program. Urban Forestry is going to be staffing up, and then we're also going to be starting plant procurement contracts to try to actually get some of these plants. The scale of what we're talking about is several times larger than what we're already planting here at the city. So we really want to take the time to make sure that we've got kind of the staffing infrastructure set up to be able to deliver on this scale. And then you said how much money is associated. What was the
How much money is going to urban forestry in the next year and a half to figure out how they do this?
We are, ultimately it's going to be a $40 million project here, and we're kind of in the midst right now figuring out like how that $40 million is going to break out over these 5 years, and then kind of what chunk is going to be left after the 5 years. So, our biggest cost in this first bit of time is just going to be staff costs and setting up the technology and the support to be able to get this program up and running. And I think you maybe asked another question about, or maybe somebody else asked a question just about like how you would sign up for a tree. One of the other things that since we're scaling up so much to be able to deliver this program, what I'm hearing from Urban Forestry is that the idea is that there could be kind of like one main portal to direct folks to be able to do signups, and then through that portal, there will be some sort of division of like what funding source or specific planting program makes sense. And I think the idea is that PSEP, will be able to kind of catch a large amount of that in a net and be able to plant there.
I have Commissioner Vandermark next, but did you have a response to something that's been said already?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit to what David was saying. That David covered that really well. And I just kind of want to emphasize what a new program, both in scale, but really the breadth of what's being proposed here. We're talking about many more contracts, so not just 1 or 2 contracts, but multiple contracts for education and outreach. The planting and the establishing, we're establishing a lot more trees than we have in the past. So we're talking about several different groups, nonprofit and for-profit, the workforce development component that we're hoping to have here. So that 2-year, year and a half or so 2-year ramp up, it's really not so much bureaucracy. It's really developing a program that doesn't exist right now. And so we're trying to acknowledge both like Urban Forestry is going to be staffing up, but as David noted, a lot of nonprofits and for-profit contractors, they're going to need to increase capacity in order to meet the number of trees that we're hoping to plant under this program. So there's just a lot of development. And while that's happening, Urban Forestry's planting program, which plants 3,500 trees a year, is going to continue. This is all additive to that. BES's planting program, which I think is looking at 500 to 1,000 trees a year, that's ongoing as well. So all this is additive to the existing programs that we have now.
So is there a dollar figure?
Well, it all depends on like hiring time. Like David said, the costs are going to be mostly just bringing staff on to start developing this. It all depends on when they're hired. I know that Angie's moving forward with a few positions right now to get those posted and recruited. But I would say the bulk of costs won't start for probably a year from now in terms of getting staff on board and all that. We don't have a dollar figure right now because it all depends on the number of positions when they're hired.
Commissioner Vandermark?
First, I just want to thank David and James, who I know have been very thoughtful and intentional through this process. Secondly, because I sit on this commission, will acknowledge I work for Friends of Trees, so I always just like to say that up front. My question, just because I know you all have thought a lot about this and thinking about the timeline, right? Like, I know the scaling up on the kind of city side is important. The one thing that I think about when I look at that is like the nonprofit and for-profit scaling up timeline within that. And then when the work needs to be done by side of that timeline. So if either of you can speak to that or those two aspects. And then I have one other question, which is just acknowledging that there's also a separate RFP process. So like if somebody wanted to apply through a different process, like let's say Verde was like, oh, we want to do something in the interim, there's outside of the ETC, there's a different opportunity before them. I just wanted to clarify, just knowing that there's other opportunities for folks through PSEF that aren't just this opportunity. To always highlight to folks, because I know we focused on this, but there's other ways. But anyways, I'll let you all speak to my question.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. I think that I might not have highlighted this, but on the timeline, one of the things that we're hoping to do early is some outreach and registration. So there is going to be some contracting and some working with some nonprofits to do some of the outreach kind of leading into the planting. Another thing that, you know, we didn't really highlight on the timeline, but we're really kind of trying to hone in our focus on is the capacity building, not just in the city, but for contractors and nonprofits. We're learning a lot from existing RFPs that have been out there that Urban Forestry ran for tree planting contracts, just to understand the capacity that exists out there in the world right now. And it's, I don't want to say alarming, but we know that we've got a lot of work to do to get these contractors ready to work on this scale. Hoping to see some sort of capacity building opportunities, whether it be through grants or other sort of contractor development supports. We don't know what that's going to look like yet, but we're hoping to get that started well before the planting so that contractors and organizations have time to kind of also staff themselves up and get any sort of equipment or technology that could be holding them back from reaching that capacity. And then to your other question, just about other RFPs, we're expecting to launch our next, community responsive grant cycle for the Portland Clean Energy Fund. We're expecting to launch that this fall, winter. And so that'll be an opportunity for, folks to submit proposals for other green infrastructure projects and workforce development projects that are separate from this program. I think that we're really trying to kind of center our tree planting investments into this program. But we do understand that some of like the workforce development proposals that may come to PSEF may fit better kind of outside of this program. James, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, thanks, David. And I think you actually covered the points that I was going to make pretty well. And hi, everybody. Good to be with you. My name is James Valdez, and I'm on the PSEF team and have also been helping support the launch of this program, along with Urban Forestry and other community partners. And yeah, just want to note that the development of some of these details will really be informed by that work group, including some of the contractor development and assistance pathways and that kind of outreach approach. The pieces that we can potentially move on a little faster than the actual planting. So just wanted to highlight that. And then, yeah, as David was mentioning, kind of the larger arc of the Portland Clean Energy Fund is that we're going to council towards the end of September with the entire climate investment plan, which will then, once Portland City Council adopts that, will give us authorization to launch what we're calling our RFP number 3 for community responsive grants. And that will include an allocation for green infrastructure types of projects. So yeah, as Megan had mentioned, that there will be additional opportunities out there in addition to this program. And in that, you'll also see a couple other allocations of funding. And so I just want to note some of those amounts because it ties in a little bit to the conversation that you all had earlier with PBOT. That there is basically a $5 million allocation for the maintenance, that income qualified maintenance for existing mature trees and some of the needs for long-term care, as well as focused funding for greater planting on 82nd Avenue that will be done in conjunction with PBOT. So that hasn't been approved yet, so we can't really outline the entire structure of that, but you'll see that in the plan that's going to council. So just want to highlight those additional pieces. And yeah, huge thanks. But yeah, I think David, you covered most of that too. So
Commissioner Bechtold.
Thank you, James and David. Good work on this project. I just want to acknowledge what a huge undertaking this is, and I actually found that timeline to be I was surprised that we would be able to do so much in such a short period, because this is a big thing. So thank you for all of your work to get it moving forward. Are there any restrictions on the funding, any timeline restrictions on the funding?
Go ahead, James.
Yeah, well, I was going to say one piece that we recognize very clearly is that we'll need, because of this expectation that that the trees that we have 5 years of maintenance and or that we have 5 years of establishment and watering for many of these trees, that we know that that budget will need to go beyond 2028 for the trees that are planted in 2026, 27, and 28. So that flexibility is going to be built into the program. The really amazing thing about the Portland Clean Energy Fund is that it is an ongoing source of revenue for climate and equity focused projects. So there isn't a timeline or expiration of the PSEP as a whole. No.
So you don't have any required milestones or anything like you must have a plan developed by X date to trigger additional funding or anything like that?
There isn't, but we will be working to develop timelines and milestones as part of that work group. So yeah.
Thank you.
Commissioner Jordan.
Yeah, thanks, David and James. One thing that came up at the roundtable recently was the community concern. It's this capacity building question, and the concern that smaller nonprofit organizations would be confronted with the kind of bewildering city contracting process, and requesting that there be some attention to either a more kind of typical process that they use, or someone, I believe, and it might have been staff, said that there might be a kind of an umbrella contractor, not a nonprofit who, with whom smaller organizations could work with as sort of a subcontractor, but they wouldn't be responsible for making their way through the RFP process and all the monitoring and reporting and all that. Do you think that is that a model that you're looking into?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, already we kind of have that precedent set with our other PSEF projects, and we're working with some of our grantees now to set kind of diverse contractor goals for their subs working on the project. I think one of the other things too that we intend to keep doing, especially with the work group, is to bring together contractors and community organizations to understand what it would look like to be a subcontractor on some of these projects. I think something else that we're still working out the details on is what sort of, when we're requesting proposals from contractors, are we going to be only accepting proposals for people who can do everything from A to Z, from procurement to planting to establishment to everything? Or are we going to have some options for some smaller organizations to be able to come in and just do portions like outreach or site planning and stuff, or maybe just do planting, maybe community planting events, maybe some folks just want to focus on establishment and watering and maintenance. And so we're still kind of working out what our pathways are and trying to make options so that not only the largest contractors will be able to be successful in their bids.
I think that's really important for that community powered notion of this. And if this umbrella type of contractor approach could work, that could also reduce the administrative costs, because you wouldn't be having a million little contracts for people who have specified, services that they can bring.
Yeah, absolutely.
Commissioner Bechtold, is that a old hand or a new hand?
New hand.
Okay.
Related to Commissioner Jortner's point, I do think, although you can't require it, I do think you can state a preference in your procurement efforts for larger contractors to work with nonprofits or utilize diverse groups or smaller organizations under their umbrella. So that can create preference points for consideration in the procurement process, if that makes sense. That was kind of legally, but you can tell big contractors that that the preference is for them to utilize smaller groups and to work with nonprofits, and then bidding on the larger scale projects, utilizing a lot of the smaller subsets, the nonprofits could help achieve both objectives of the benefits of working with a big contractor and administrative kind of ease, and allowing smaller groups to be part of a very complex RFP process, and then have that community engagement piece. I think community engagement is very specialized, so typically you would break out your potential vendors and go to RFP on kind of like the start to finish on the planting process, and then start to finish on the community aspects. Just a couple thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I one of the things we're hoping to do is to be able to kind of like communicate that to everybody who's coming in with interest, and even to try and stimulate some sort of collaborations and partnerships out there, so people have all the information they need to enter this.
Any other questions or thoughts? I had a couple. So can you talk a little bit more about how you foresee the capacity building, especially among the nonprofits happening? And have you learned anything from the early work that you did with PSEF on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I see it in a few different ways. I think that just from managing a bunch of different grants right now, and understanding what it takes for an organization to really scale up, it's not easy to spend money. So we know that people are talking about staff, workforce development within their organizations. And we know that people are in need of equipment and trucks and watering equipment. That's one big piece that we know about. And then another thing that I'm kind of witnessing firsthand is a lot of smaller organizations not having the administrative capacity to be able to manage these contracts and manage cash flow at this scale. So you're kind of looking across all those different things. And as far as what options we're considering, it's tricky with direct contracts. We can't really necessarily pay for a company. We can't pay for them to get a new watering truck or equipment like that through a contract. And so I think we're exploring opportunities for grants, or what other ways we might be able to kind of reduce barriers for folks to be able to get tools and equipment to be able to help them be more successful in their bids. Something else I know that we're doing with the urban forestry folks is just kind of analyzing some of the bids that came in their most recent RFP for planting, just to try to understand like how, like what the differences are for what's coming in there. The price per tree can be really significant differences across different bids. So I think we'll take a little bit of time to try to understand specifically like what barriers were in the way there, and try to make some targeted, yeah. Angie, do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I'll just say one other thing that we are considering is that some of the feedback that we heard from folks is that they want technical support and advisement from the city to be successful in this. So part of our staffing structure that we'll end up proposing from urban forestry is to be able to provide that time, advisement, energy, like hand in hand working with folks. What is the best way to water? How do I plan those routes? And this is all fairly new. And so we're trying to look at it from the really long-term perspective of, if we get that capacity built, if we set up this structure, this really is the beginning of something big and long-term. So I don't know if we have all those answers yet, but that's just one other element that we're adding.
Did you have a comment on that?
Yeah, and just one more thing I'll add that I know that Angie's tree planting team is working on right now is the city is able to do direct contracts with they're called COVID certified firms. With the old term for that is minority, women-owned, and emerging small businesses. So some of these smaller contractors, Angie's team is looking to create a few small contracts to plant, 40, 50 trees with some of these smaller groups, just to give them experience working with some of the standards we have, contracting with the city. And that's something that's being paid for out of our tree planting and preservation fund, not PSEF funds. But we're hoping that that can help sort of like expand some of the organizations that would be interested in applying to these future PSEF funded grants, and just getting them experience planting at that scale. I think a lot of these contractors, will do smaller jobs, residential sites, but getting that experience working with urban forestry, doing 40, 50 trees at a time, watering those over several years. So not the solution to the entire challenge that we're discussing here, but just one of the things that we're doing right now.
I had another quick question, and that is, what about the uptake, the community uptake side of so many more trees? I mean, I guess the hope is with a massive increase in budget that, the community could sort of take this up at the same rate they were taking it up when the budget was less, And so I'm interested in what you think about that, and whether you plan to go in with kind of full speed operations one way versus, running a few pilots side by side of different approaches. And anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if David or James have anything to add on that, but I know that is one of the reasons that timeline builds in a lot of education and outreach kind of before the planting happens. So I think that's definitely part of the consideration there. Yeah.
Maybe just an additional piece I'd add is that we, in this program, are not looking exclusively at street trees, kind of as they're defined as, the plantable area adjacent to people's properties. We're also looking at opportunities to plant trees in people's yards and to provide some establishment care for those as well. So I think that flexibility of location will also hopefully provide better uptake than just focusing exclusively on street trees. So it is a much broader vision than I think we as a city have done in the past. And just really grateful for all the insight and partnership of everybody who's worked on this so far, and lots more to come, because those questions will be sort of defined by that work group of exactly where geographically we focus and some of those approaches. So.
And James, just real quick, aren't y'all looking at community sites too, like schools and some other folks in the targeted sites in the community? Partners?
We are looking at some community sites, but I would note that for schools, we have a separate funding allocation that the school districts are able to allocate or able to spend that can be spent on trees, but it'll be up to each district to identify whether their needs are more on the building upgrade side or trees and shade or deep paving. It's sort of a flexible pool of funding made available to the school districts. So
I think it would be good to just spend a few minutes on how the Urban Forestry Commission could best support this work going forward, and what kind of updates would we want to see and what kind of input and that sort of thing. So I know there was interest in having someone from the UFC actually on the work group. Where are we at with that?
I think David and James are really leading that part, so I'll let them respond.
Okay.
We're hoping to get the work group kind of up and running this fall. So I'm going to kind of start doing recruitments for that pretty soon, and reaching out to the entities that we want to kind of have send forward somebody. But I think we can have an open conversation with y'all too about how you want to be represented, whether you want to just have a seat at every meeting and it doesn't necessarily need to be the same person, or if you want to have somebody jump in for a year and then somebody else jump in for a year. I think that all of that is really flexible. And I think that there's going to be times too throughout the duration of this program where it may make sense to kind of bring the work group closer together with Urban Forestry Commission on any sort of topic specific discussions. Yeah, not fully baked yet on that, but you will definitely be hearing from us, you know, probably this fall, October, September, somewhere in there.
Follow-up
This
question
isn't-
about that.
Yeah.
What is there a term to that? Because I think the time frame you showed was around 5 years or so. So are you anticipating this work group being the same set of people for a 5-year duration? Or is there some sort of like terming to the people that are part of the work group?
Great question. We are still kind of working that out right now. I think it's going to be important to have this work group in place, you know, at the very least for this first 5 years, just while the whole thing is ramping up. And just from where I sit, I imagine just knowing how these things work, like in some cases, it may make more sense to have, you know, Urban Forestry Commission just have a spot that is just always filled. You know, if somebody can't make it, maybe we can get someone in there. But for some of the other positions, some of the community-based organizations, like maybe they will have a term. I don't know. We haven't figured that out yet. There's a lot of options, and we're still working through that right now.
Okay, thank you.
Well, that's great. As you can tell, we're extremely interested and supportive of this really creative work. And, you know, we have a very diverse group with a lot of different skills that can really sort of serve as another sounding board for the group. And so, yeah, I think regular updates would be good to be determined what that should look like.
Great, thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah, we
and going
appreciate the
forward,
support.
yeah, whatever we could do to help remove barriers and that type of thing. So
Thank you. Thanks for having us here today. I don't want to take up too much extra time, but I really appreciate y'all being able to hear us out.
thanks. Okay, any other thoughts, folks, or parting comments or thoughts? All right, good. We get to leave 2 minutes early.
Yes.
Take care. Bye-bye, everyone. See you next month.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.